Welcome to The Writing Life, the podcast for anyone who writes. I'm your host, Steph, coming to you from the wonderfully autumnal National Centre for Writing in Norwich. Today, we're delighted to be joined by best-selling crime author Peter James, who has previously graced us as a special guest at the Norwich Crime Writing Festival. It's a pleasure to welcome Peter back for a conversation with NCW Chief Executive Peggy Hughes, where they'll dive into the fascinating process of researching and writing a crime novel. Peter James is, of course, a UK No.1 best-selling author, best known for his Detective Superintendent Roy Grace series, which has now been adapted into a hit ITV drama. A firm favourite among crime and thriller enthusiasts, Peter's fast-paced page-turners are renowned for their unexpected plot twists, sinister characters, and authentic portrayal of modern-day policing. Over the course of his career, Peter has won more than 40 awards, including the WHSmith Best Crime Author of All Time Award and the prestigious Crime Writers Association Diamond Dagger. Peter spoke with Peggy about the practical implications of his research for his thriller novels, sharing insights into how he brings authenticity to his stories. They also discuss the beginning of his writing career, his tips for keeping readers hooked, and his process for developing the compelling characters in his Roy Grace crime series. So without further ado, let me hand over to Peter James in conversation with Peggy Hughes.
Peter, hello. Nice to see you.
Thank you, Peggy. Likewise.
And for our listeners who will not be able to see this view that I can see there are lots of hats behind you and curious mannequins. What's this? Where are you?
I'm in my office, which is at the top of an 80-foot tower. I have 72 steps I have to climb up. And
Wow.
I guess because I've been going out with the police for about over 40 years, both in England and in many countries around the world, police officers know that I collect police memorabilia. So when they retire, they tend to send me their hats, their badges, quite often their uniforms too. So I sit writing with a kind of 360-degree view of different parts of Jersey in a kind of surrounded by police memorabilia.
Extraordinary. How did you come to write in a tower? That's fascinating.
Well, when I was a kid, I was a big fan of Yeats, and I read that Yeats wrote in a tower. I mean, there seems to be a thing with some of the Irish writers. James Joyce, for a time, wrote in a tower near Dublin. We were house hunting in Jersey about 7 years ago now, and looked at loads of houses, and suddenly saw this one with this huge granite tower, and I thought, that's got my name on it. It's great because when I'm up here, I kind of come up in the morning and I'm come away from everything. Not many people want to climb 72 steps and bother me.
No, perfect peace, some would say.
I love it.
Fabulous. Well, thank you for your time today, Peter. We're discussing One of Us is Dead, the latest in the Roy Grace series. I just wonder, I suppose, just to set the scene, if you wanted, rather than me trying to do that, if you wanted to kind of just tell us what on earth is going on here in this latest installment.
Right. I know many other writers are the same. Probably about once a fortnight, somebody says to me, Peter, I've got a great idea for a book you're going to want to write. And you know fine well, it might be a great idea. It's not probably going to be something I want to spend a year of my life researching and writing. But on this occasion, it was 2 years ago, and I bumped into the son of an old friend. And he said, Pete, I've got a story you're going to want to write. I said, John, I'm sure you have. No, I'm going to tell you this. I guarantee you're going to want to write it. So I had a coffee with him, and he said, a guy I know who's proper dodgy was at a funeral a few months ago. He arrived late. It was pelting with rain. It was a country church, absolutely rammed. No seat available, so he had to stand at the back. And halfway through the service, he notices a bloke sitting 6 pews in front of him, whose funeral he went to 2 years before and gave the eulogy at. And I said, did he manage to get to him? He said, no. He said, at the end of the service, everybody stood up, the path was blocked. And by the time we got to the front of the church, the guy had vanished. And I thought, yeah, I want to write that. That's the opening chapter, basically. One of Us is Dead.
Goodness, the opening chapter wrote itself then in this case. I mean, that did, it makes me think that truth truly is stranger than fiction. Would you say?
I think so. I think every day you read something in a newspaper that you think, if I wrote that, people wouldn't actually believe it. And also, I do think think what I find fascinating is people often say to writers, where'd you get your ideas from? And actually, and a lot of the time, ideas find me, like this one. It's kind of strange. You suddenly know, you just know there's something, when I write, I love learning stuff. I love, and across Roy Grace books, I've written about many themes, whether it's the world of illegal dog trafficking or the world of art forgery, things that interest me enough to want to spend a year of my life kind of working on it. And so often these ideas just come out of the blue. Or somebody speaks to me and says, you know something?
Yeah. What is it then, though, about the quality of an idea that there's a book in there? It's a fascinating story, obviously, to hear about the dead person turning up at the funeral. But what is it that makes that's the starting engine? Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, I think it's with writing. There's a certain sort of kind of alchemy that I want to entertain, but I also want to inform. I write the books of the kind that I would like to read. And I think readers are smart. When we read, most readers don't just want a page-turning story. They want to learn something about life, about the world we live in, about something the author has kind of researched. So the first challenge for me is it going to be is the opportunity to have a really gripping story where people are going to go, oh my God, what happens next? Because that's the key. But also, is it going to be satisfying in terms of, are my readers going to get something out of this? Are they going to have a good experience? Are they going to come away saying, yeah, I know subject that I didn't know about before? And I'm not talking about how to dismantle and put back together an AK-47. Something that kind of helps kind of in a way make sense of the huge puzzle that our life is.
I mean, we've moved straight into. I wanted to ask you all about your research approach in any case, because I think it's fair to say you're famously a meticulous researcher, and I just would love to know more about how you go about that. What are the practical implications of that for you? What does that look like?
I guess my starting point with writing crime was in my early days. I desperately wanted to be a writer. I wrote the Great British Novel when I was 18. Luckily nobody else thought it was, and it never got published. But when I was like in my late 20s, my then wife said to me, when are you going to write this novel you've always talked about? And I read there was a shortage of spy thrillers. I thought I could write a spy thriller. And so I did. And to my amazement, I read, it was called Dead Letter Drop. I'm only giving you the title so nobody buys it because it was a terrible book. And I got a 2-book deal and it got published. And it didn't sell. And the second book sold even less. And I was at a publishing party and I bumped into a lovely lady called Lizzie Buchan. And Lizzie was at that time working for Penguin, writing jacket blurb. She's now a well-known author herself. And she looked at me and she said, why on earth are you writing spy thrillers? You're up against people like John le Carré, who've come out of the intelligence services. What can you tell anybody about spies? You know nothing. It was a real, and then hand in hand with that, the second book that I wrote, which was called Atom Bomb Angel, and it was about the son of a Namibian uranium miner whose dad dies from cancer contraction in the uranium mine, and he wants to get revenge on the Western world by blowing up a nuclear power station, and comes to England, and the story goes on from there. And I needed to set some chapters in Namibia, and I couldn't afford to go. This was back in 1981. So I kind of looked it up in the library. I met somebody who'd been there once, and I basically made it up. And the first book came out and there was a lot of publicity about nuclear power. So I was bombarded with requests for interviews. And the first interview I did, this very charming lady said, oh, well, what was it like in Namibia? And I said, well, it was hot, quite sandy, a bit dusty. And I thought, I've not only lied to you, I've lied to everybody who will ever read this book. And I made a promise to myself right then and there that I would never write anything again about anything that I hadn't had access to research and experienced. That was a starting point. And then literally a week later, we got burgled. And a young detective in Brighton called Mike Harris came to take fingerprints. And he saw these first 2 books. He said, oh, you're a writer. If you ever want research out with the police, give me a call. And he was married to a detective. My then wife was a lawyer. And they invited us to a barbecue at their house. And they had a dozen of their friends, all cops. Response, homicide, traffic. And just talking to these people, I thought, wow, from a writer's standpoint, nobody sees more of human life in a career than a police officer. And when they realized I was genuinely interested, they said, well, come and spend some time with us. And over the next 10 years, I was writing psychological thrillers, started putting police characters in. They liked how I portrayed them. And I sort of became part of the furniture of Sussex Police. They'd phone me and say, oh, Peter, we're doing a raid tomorrow morning. So at 7 o'clock.
You're the mascot of sorts.
Way, yeah.
Yeah.
There's another word for it, they call it, which is an SH1T magnet, which is if you go along, something's going to happen.
Something's going to fly.
They come out for a ride, but something will kick off.
Yeah. So in among all that, then the research and you know what an opportunity to be absolutely on the beat and to see it up close. But where then did Roy Grace take form within all that? You know, is there a Roy Grace shaped person at Sussex Police or a composite of folks?
Very much so. It was in 1997, and one of my kind of friends in the police, I was spending a day at Brighton police station. They said, well, there's quite an interesting homicide detective you might like to meet. And I went to a guy called Dave Gaylor. And I went into his office, and I've honestly never seen an office so untidy. It was just covered in blue and green plastic crates bulging with manila folders and this balding dome just at the back. And I said, are you moving? And he said, no. He said, I'm a homicide detective. I'm a DI. But I've just been tasked with reopening all the unsolved murders in Sussex where there is still the chance of catching an offender or still somebody alive who could benefit from closure. He said, each one of these is a principal case file of an unsolved murder and the last chance the victim has for justice and the family have for closure. And I love that really human image about him. And he said, what are you writing at the moment? And I was writing a thriller called Denial. And he said, tell me about it. I was about halfway through it. I started saying, he said, hang on a sec, why is your detective not doing this? I don't think that lady would have done that. I think she'd have done this. I thought, this guy's got a really creative side. He helped me on the next two books. And in 2002, he was promoted to Detective Chief Superintendent, basically head of major crime for Sussex. And my publishers, Pam Macmillan, they used to publish Peter Robinson, and he just moved. And he was their #1 crime author. And they said, oh, we've just lost Peter Robinson. We need a new crime writer. Would you be interested in trying to create a new fictional cop? So I went to Dave Gaylor and I said, how would you like to be a fictional detective? And he loved it. I mean, he is my real life Roy Grace. He doesn't look like Roy Grace. I mean, John Simm looks much more like Roy. But Dave and I, we became really good mates to the point where we have the same table in the same pub and a new moleskin notebook. I give him the plan for each book, and then we go through all the policing elements. He reads every 100 pages along with my wife, and he comes back with all the policing aspects. And when Laura and I got married in 2015, he was best man.
Oh, wow.
He also is an advisor to the scriptwriter of the plays.
So he's ended up with an unexpected career for himself in that sense.
He has, and I think he absolutely loves it.
Yeah, it's brilliant. I mean, as an extension to that thought, then I wonder, and I always wonder this with you know, thriller series, you know, where there's books and books with the same character, and what that character then means to you. So Dave to the side, what does it mean to you to walk alongside Roy Grace, so to speak, all these years?
It's quite funny. I mean, we've been on set quite often, the filming. So I've got Dave Gaylor, my fictional Roy Grace. I've got John Simm, the actor Roy Grace. I find it immensely helpful. I think the hardest thing for a writer to do, the most important thing for a writer to do, and the hardest thing is to create characters that people connect with. And it's very hard. I've always found it really hard to just create a character out of thin air. Every character that I've ever written is modeled on somebody that I've met. I might make a character based on you, but I might not make you a radio presenter. I might make you a brain surgeon, or a filing clerk. But it's the physical characteristics. We know that most people have a head, a body. It's the differences that bring people alive, and you see that and so having a real life Dave Gaylor and also a real life Roy Grace, and now having John Simm and all the acting cast, I find that massively helpful, because I've always sat down when I started Roy Grace novel and I go, hi Roy, how's it going? How's the love life going with Claire? What's happening? Hi Glenn, how's your train crash of love life going? Hi Norman, who have you upset this week?
It reminds me of something that Hilary Mantel apparently said when she was building character. She would sort of invite the character into the room to sit on a chair in front of her, and that's how she would be able to, much like you're saying, kind of be able to conceive of how they would react to any given plot.
I totally get that. Because I think that if you think back to all the books you've ever loved, I think probably what we remember most of all is the character. That we often forget what the details of a plot, but I'll remember the characters that I've loved. Can't remember the plots of all the Sherlock Holmes, but I remember the character.
To speak a little bit of plot, though, and obviously it's we won't give any spoilers away to our listeners, but how then do you take this central, this starting engine, if you like, of the story your friend told you, and then move that into this chunky book we see before us? Where does plot come into it for you, and do you always know where you're driving towards as you're driving, or has that sort of come towards the end?
It's a great question. I'm actually working on a book on writing at the moment, which will be coming out in a couple of years' time, 26. But often people say to me, I've got writer's block. What do you suggest? And I say I don't believe in writer's block. My first question to anybody who says they've got writer's block is, do you know the ending of the story? And I guarantee you, Peggy, they'll say no. I said, would you get in a car, start driving if you didn't know where you're going? Whether you're going to Waitrose in the centre of Norwich, or whether you're going to drive to Sunderland. So my kind of starting point always when I'm writing is the ending. I want to know the ending. I get to like a vanishing point. And then I follow really the old sort of theatrical tradition. I do a 3-act structure, which is like, I literally make a graph. Very simple. I do a first peak point. What is the first oh gosh moment? Mm-hmm. And then the second, which has got to be higher, more exciting. And then the third, which is like the climax. So in One of Us is Dead, the first peak actually comes really early when my character is at the funeral and he sees the bloke. That's wow. And then the next peak goes on from there, and the next peak from there. And Dead Simple, when I wrote Dead Simple, the first Roy Grace novel, the end of chapter 1, the groom is getting married in 2 days' time, is buried alive in a coffin in remote woodlands as a stag night prank, and all the guys who know where he is and buried him there killed in a car crash. So I set myself this sort of challenge. I give up a first spike fairly early on, then the next spike, then a bigger spike. And then as the story progresses, I kind of fill it in more. And I am also a great believer in a combination of plotting, but also spontaneity. I always say, if you don't surprise yourself, you're not going to surprise your readers. So I tend to plan the first 100 pages in detail. So, because there's certain stages I find with writing, but when I've written like the first chapter is really important. I think the first page of your book, that's the one I can spend a week on the first page just getting it right, because I want to get the readers engaged, hooked. And then when I hit about page 20, then I know I've started proper. And then when I get to page 100, characters are introduced, and then things can start to take on a life of their own. And I love something that pops in my head that wasn't there 10 seconds ago.
Yeah. So you've got the framework, but you can kind of veer off as needed. Yeah. I'm fascinated by you writing a book on writing, and I would like to return to that, I think. But I wonder, what is, to your view, if you like, the sort of science behind the 3 peaks? Is that, in terms of the ingredients of a thriller, is that to hook the reader? You'll just have to hear a bit more about that.
Well, I think that if you go back to the way storytelling used to be, if you go back to like Victorian days, there weren't all the thousands of distractions for readers. Mm-hmm. I remember in Becky in Vanity Fair, and I think Becky Sharp is travelling on a train through Yorkshire, and Thackeray says, "Oh dear reader, let me take you aside for a minute and tell you about the beautiful Yorkshire dales and the country." I mean, if you did that today, people would go, "Rubbish!" You didn't have much else other than the book in those days. Tapestry, maybe paint. Very few now. There's a million things that any reader can turn to, from checking emails, texts, computer games, television, a lot. So I'm a great believer. You really need to keep the reader glued to the page. Like, I have an invisible sign in front of me when I'm writing, which is, does this make the reader want to read on? And if it doesn't, then why is it there? Take it out. I think that, and people love it, and the other thing that I do is, I think most of us read at night in bed and we're tired. I love short chapters. Mm-hmm. If I I'm lying in bed and I look at a book, the next chapter is 53 pages, I think, tomorrow. I think, it's only 1.5 pages, I'll have that. Oh, the next chapter is only 3 pages. Oh, and next thing I know, it's 2 a.m. and I'm still reading.
Yeah, it hooks you in. Absolutely.
I think the writer's job is to make life easy for the reader, not a challenge.
Who are the writers that hooked you then? What got you writing, or which writers gave you permission, if you like, or inspired you, or
I think I've always been an avid reader right from childhood. read all the kind of classic, kids' books, Enid Blyton and Richard Crompton and that. But the first writer that actually really spoke to me was Graham Greene in Brighton Rock. I was a kid growing up in Brighton, and I read Brighton Rock for the first time at the age of 14. And that book blew me away because I'd always loved crime. I've been a big fan of Agatha Christie and Doyle. But it seemed to me that the English crime novel would tend to begin with a dead body in a library or dead, and the rest of the book is the puzzle to solve it. Graham Greene's Brighton Rock is a crime novel, but it's a crime thriller, and the victim is still alive and in peril at the end of the first chapter. And he wrote, I think, one of the best opening lines that's ever been written for a thriller, which was, "Within 3 hours of arriving in Brighton, Hale knew they meant to murder him." Who's Hale? Why is he in Brighton? And also that book, although it was a crime thriller, it dealt with a really big issue of kind of Catholic guilt. The central character, Pinky, is a 17-year-old boy gangster in charge of this bunch of middle-aged criminal misfits. And he's a killer. But at the same time, he's terrified of eternal damnation. And it taught me just the power of a last line. I think the two most important lines in writing a book, the first line and the last line. And that last sentence of the Brighton Rock, the novel, is psychologically, I think, one of the most chilling, nastiest, darkest lines ever. And I put that book down at 14, and I thought, one day I'm going to try and write a crime novel set in Brighton that's 10% as good as this.
And now you've written loads and sold millions, so you did it. Do you subscribe to Graham Greene's, what's his quote about the sliver of ice in the heart? Every writer needs a sliver of ice.
Completely. I think that if you are afraid of what readers are going to think, or you're afraid of offending people, don't be a writer. You will, unfortunately, it's inevitable if you're going to write stories that someone's going to think, that could be based on me. I remember my mum, and in that first terrible spy thriller, Dead Without a Drop, I had this really gross sex scene, which this guy had to sleep with this rather gross woman. And I was really worried because I was quite, relatively young, and I thought, what's my mum going to think when she reads this? Anyhow, so the book came out, and Mum dutifully bought a copy, one of the 2 copies I think I sold. And about a week later, she phones me up, and she says, "Oh, Peter, I've read the book." I said, "Oh, what do you think, Mum?" "Could you ask your publishers to take your age off the cover, because people will be able to work out I'm over 40.
Bless her.
And that was a big lesson to me. I think, actually, write what you want.
Yeah.
And I think Graham Greene's absolutely right. I think you've got to have freedom. And one of the things that I really admire about Queen Camilla is her pretty much, she's almost said it, publish and be damned attitude. Writers should write what they want and not what they feel might be correct.
On that note, though, and I always feel this with crime, there's some things that surely don't feel nice to write. I mean, in terms of the violence or the difficult scenes. And I did want to ask you a little bit about your approach to that. How do you approach it, and how do you earth yourself after a particularly difficult scene, I suppose?
It's a good point. I think, firstly, I do want readers to have a good time, but I do at the same time, because I'm trying to portray what the police are doing and seeing. There are, at times, gruesome scenes in some of the books, and I've been to many horrific crime scenes, both in the UK and in countries abroad. And one of the ways I do it is actually through exercise and through animals. We have a huge menagerie of animals. We have about 200 animals. We have pygmy goats. We have dogs, cats, rabbits, chickens, ducks. And my wife Laura and I go out first thing in the morning and we walk the dogs. And you wake up in the morning too, and there's not just dark stuff that I might have written, but dark stuff on the news, and hand feed the goats popcorn and ginger biscuits, and they don't know all the horrible stuff going on in the world. I find animals incredibly grounding just to be in their company. All they want is to find a little ray of sunshine to sit in for a few hours, and they're happy. So I find that's a great way of kind of bringing myself back down to earth. But also, I try to show what the police are seeing without describing the gore. I don't want to give my readers his nightmares. I want them to have frights and have a kind of vicarious thrill, but not to be grossed out.
Absolutely. Just I think around difficulty in the world and almost what I would perceive to be the crime writers. I don't know, sort of that writing about this stuff through fiction is a way of trying to understand it and come to terms that this stuff is happening in the world, crimes, difficult things. Do you feel that responsibility to yourself that fiction is a way of understanding difficult motivations or troubling things?
Oh yeah, if you go back to the history of literature, Sophocles, Oedipus, I think that's the book that might well have been on crime shelves. I think if Shakespeare was writing today, I wouldn't be at all surprised if he wasn't going to be a crime writer. Charles Dickens too, a lot of his work, where would that sit on those shelves today? I think people love reading about crime. They always have done. And I think there are a number of reasons. The first is obviously we enjoy a thrill. But I think at a deeper level, we want to understand the world. I think part of our fascination with reading about murder is, very deep rooted in us is we're genetically programmed to survive. It's the same principle, if you drive along somewhere and you see a terrible car crash, everybody slows down. I don't think we slow down to look because we're vampires or ghouls. I think we're fascinated. And the fascination is, how did that happen? How do I avoid that ever happening to me? And I think when you're reading a crime thriller and somebody is assaulted or murdered, part of you going, how do I make sure I never get in the situation that victim was? That's going on at a very deeply subconscious level also. And I think we are fascinated also by what is the difference between that person who kills and me? Or is there actually a difference?
Do you think there is?
Where the difference is the person who can kill and live with their conscience and the person who can and can't. And to give you a fleeting example of that, a psychopath is somebody who can kill and it doesn't bother them. But most people, it's their conscience that gets them. So the classic scenario, Fred's married to Doris and starts having an affair with Wendy. And he thinks, what would be a lot less distressing and cheaper if I offed Doris, put her under the kitchen floor, told our friends that she's gone off to live with her sister in New Zealand. And most people don't have a huge circle of friends. So he does it, he bashes her over the head, puts her under the kitchen floor, re-screeds it, and he's happy with Wendy. But at some point, if he's not a psychopath, he's going to have to tell someone. It's going to prey on his conscience. And he takes his best mate, Bill, out for a drink. He says, Bill, I actually murdered Doris, but it's all right because I love Wendy, isn't it? And Bill will say, I'm afraid it's not. And now that you've told me I'm an accessory to murder, one of us is going to have to go to the police. That's how so many get caught. The moment they tell someone. Luckily, psychopaths are a very tiny percentage.
Yes, and of course that does bring us around back to the book and Rufus, who indeed is our. That's not a spoiler. I hope to say that he is our man of the moment here. Do you want to introduce us to Rufus? Say a little bit more about his inventive, kind of approach to these things, shall we say?
Yeah, Rufus is pretty much a kind of killer for hire whose method of operation is to make all his deaths look like accidents. So quite early on in One of Us is Dead, in fact, the unfortunate star of the show, the character in the coffin in the church at the beginning, is one of life's eternal losers. One of his old school friends called Barney. Barney has sort of failed at acting, he's failed at this, and his last failure in life is to become an Instagram foodie. And he foraged mushrooms and unfortunately picked death cap mushrooms. Or so Rufus Hawks made it look. And then there are a couple of other deaths that follow that are very much accidents that Rufus engineers. One of which is a professor opening a can of Coke and swallowing a wasp.
One thing that struck me about Rufus, that level of almost technology that he applies to his task, and it made me think that you yourself might be, interested. I think you've said at the top in terms of kind of the research and learning. I just wondered if you wanted to say more about that, about sort of the relationship, I think, between crime and technology. It feels like these books are really not just of their moment, but almost of a future moment in terms of what you're exploring.
Yeah, I guess over the 40-odd years I've been going out with the police, I've realized that villains and cops are playing a constant game of catch up with each other. It's usually the villains who are actually the inventors, and then the police cotton on, then the villains move on to the next thing. I remember sitting in on a morning meeting at Brighton police station. They have every morning, weekday morning at 9:00, they have a big meeting. It's done more on Teams now than around the table. And they review everything that's happened in the city in the last 24 24 hours. And I was sitting there about 15 years ago, and the then commander of Brighton and Hove, a guy called Kevin Moore, turned to me. He said, "Peter, you've come on a historic day. This is the first day since records began. There's not been an overnight domestic burglary in Brighton and Hove." And I said, "Fantastic, you've won the war on crime." And he laughed and he said, "Today's housebreaker is fast becoming a dinosaur. People have lights, alarms, cameras, watch. Everybody's getting these smart doorbells." He said, that today's villains make much more money out of drug dealing or out of internet fraud. He said, internet fraud is going to be the future of crime. He said, mark my words. And, and it really has. The criminals have moved much more into technology. You shin up a drain pipe in the middle of the night, chances are, it's cold and wet and damp and you might get caught. If you're conducting internet fraud with a router that's routed you through 20 countries that the police cannot trace. And so the use of technology, but at the same time, the police. I mean, when I first wrote the first Roy Grace novel, Dead Simple, back in 2000, I was working on it in 2003. The Sussex Police high-tech crime unit consisted of a traffic sergeant who'd been co-opted and 3 computer geeks. Digital forensics, as it's now called, is the biggest department in the whole of the police.
Yeah. Wow. I mean, I think you said that was 15 years ago that they predicted internet fraud and so forth. I mean, do you have a view on what the next 15 years will bring in terms of crime and trends?
I think artificial intelligence is definitely going to, in the hands of villains. I think we're going to see a lot more. I wrote about in Dead at First Sight, and I wrote about internet romance fraud and how sophisticated it is. I mean, you and I could go to one of 11 colleges in Ghana and learn to be internet romance fraudsters. You virtually get a diploma in it.
Goodness.
They teach you how to chat to people. They even send people to different countries to learn the culture. So that, a guy who's looking for a new partner, or a lady who's looking for a new partner, they'll find somebody really conversant, knows their culture. They're very sophisticated, and I'm sure you, like all of us, have had people sending emails that look just like they come from the bank. I think that at the moment is a very big crime area.
Fascinating. What, to your view, then, has changed in the world of crime fiction in this time that you've been writing? I mean, obviously the world has evolved, as you've just said, but is there anything that you would remark on from when the first book to now?
Yes, I think the biggest change, and I think it's a really exciting change, is the impact that the work of the detective has on them. I think if you look at Conan Doyle, Sherlock Holmes, and Watson, Holmes was pretty much the same character throughout. If you look at Miss Marple, Poirot, they're wonderful creations, but they're not impacted by what they see. Whereas I think very much, if you look at Ian Rankin's Rebus, Rebus is a man, who's greatly impacted by all the years that he has been a homicide detective. Roy Grace too, is impacted by stuff he sees, and I think general trend, again with Michael Connolly and Bosch, I think making the detective a real kind of living, changing human being, because people forget that police officers are normal human beings. The head of the Met once said, we are ordinary people. We and the other emergency services are ordinary people doing extraordinary things. And they go to, talking some years ago to a friend of mine who was a traffic officer, who'd just been to a horrific double murder of 2 tiny kids, like aged 2 and 4, by their mother trying to set the father up in a horrible divorce. And he had to try and resuscitate them and then go home and bath his own 2 and 4-year-olds. And, we forget that all those terrible things that hopefully many of us never have to experience in our lives, police see daily. And I think writers are trying to portray that more. And I think that makes it really interesting because, police officers aren't Superman.
Coming sort of to the end of our conversation here, but I did wonder if you could say a little bit more about the book on writing. Obviously, we're the National Centre for Writing, and we have a lot of listeners who are themselves writers or kind of beginning on their writing journey. I wonder what that book's shape is, and what advice you would especially want to land with people listening today from your vantage.
Yeah, well, in the book, I'm putting in kind of really my own kind of journey to becoming a writer, from a kid with dreams to the nuts and bolts of it. What I think makes people want to turn pages. I mean, I think two of the big tips that I always give to any fledgling writer, somebody who wants to write, or somebody who's just interested in writing, is take take a best-selling book, a real best-selling book of the kind you want to write, whether it's a crime thriller, it's sci-fi, whether it's historical fiction, whatever it is, and deconstruct it. See what made you want to read it, what made you engage with the characters, how the writer made you keep wanting to turn the page. If you were going to be a car mechanic, and I'm not being crass here, if you want to be a car mechanic, you take a car apart, you take the engine apart, put it back together, figure out how it all works. If you're going to be a medical student, you'd be given a cadaver for a year. You spend a year dissecting it, seeing how all the bits of it work. And I think that, with writing, don't be ashamed to do that. It's what I did with the novels that I loved and admired and thought, God, I wish I'd written that. I would literally deconstruct them.
And what keeps you writing?
I love it. I genuinely, people often say to me, are you ever going to retire? And I say, well, if I retired, I'd write a book, so it's not my point. I love it. I have endless curiosity about the world. And what I love is that, I guess, because I'm kind of people who like my books kind of open up whatever their careers are to me, let me kind of explore them. I'm planning a book set in the Grand Hotel in Brighton, and I did a day as a concierge there last year. It was brilliant. I was in full uniform. I got a £5 tip as well for carrying some bags out.
Great.
I love doing the research. I love. I drove for my new book coming out out in September 25. I drove a train from Brighton to London and back with 8 carriages.
Wow.
I was with the senior instructor of Network Rail, so I wasn't entirely aware. But
I was going to say you were cut loose on a train, did they? No. That's real method writing, though, isn't it? That's the method actor's view on writing. How you do that.
I don't think you can write something that really feels authentic if it's like secondhand or you've got it from a book. For me personally, every writer has their own, but for me, it's I want to experience it. I want to be in that police car in a 4-car chase, or I want to be in that train or behind the concierge desk at the hotel, or whatever I'm writing about. I want to kind of immerse myself in it.
Remarkable. Just finally, you just touched on the latest book, and I know this one's just arrived, but what next for Roy Grace? Is this to say it's already in the pipeline, already done? Yeah,
the next one is already written. I can't say too much about it, but
fine.
I think I'm probably more excited about it than even One of Us is Dead. So, and then I'm working on the writing book. I've got a new stage play starting on tour, national tour in February, which is based on my Roy Grace novel, Picture You Dead. And that'll be all over the country. I think it's coming to Norwich. And Grace, season 5 of Grace has just finished shooting. So Grace will be back on our television screens next year.
Good news. Did you ever think, Peter, when you started, not the 2 novels that you've alluded to that didn't quite fly, but did you ever think that Roy Grace would go on to such, millions of readers, to these different stage and TV, adaptations? Never
in my wildest dreams. I wasn't a very confident kid. I knew I wanted to write, but I remember when I was about 13 and I was in class and we'd had to write an essay, and I'd struggled all weekend like this 4-page essay, and I thought, how can anybody write a 500-page novel? Just how is it physically possible? The best birthday present I ever had for my life was from my dad, my 17th birthday. He bought me a little portable electric typewriter and this battle axe. He'd come to the house every day for 2 weeks to teach me to touch type, and she'd cover the keypads up, and if I looked down, she'd hit my fingers with a ruler. She'd, don't look! And I learned to type really fast out of sheer terror, and it stood me in great stead ever since.
Fabulous.
And I had one teacher at school who encouraged me, a guy called David Sumscale, who went on to become headmaster of Westminster. And we're still in touch, which is lovely. We meet up. And I won sort of Child House Poetry Prize when I was 15, and that was the first moment when I thought, maybe I've got something.
Maybe I'll do it. Yeah, fabulous. Peter, thank you so much. It's been very, very nice to talk to you. But thank you for your time.
It's a pleasure, Peggy. Thank you very much.
And that is a wrap for today's episode. A huge thank you to Peter, James and Peggy for sharing their time and insights with us. If you have any questions or you want to get in touch, we're easy to find on social media. Follow us at Writers Centre on Twitter and Instagram, or catch us on Facebook. And don't forget, you can sign up to our newsletter at nationalcentreforwriting.org.uk for all the latest updates. As a UK registered charity, we rely on the generosity of our supporters to continue our work. So if you'd like to help, please visit our website and head over to the Support Us page to make a donation. If you enjoyed today's episode, please do consider subscribing, rating, and leaving us a review. It really helps other writers discover the podcast. Thanks again for listening. Keep writing, and I'll catch you on the next episode.